Do you want Detroit sports talk done right?
Yeah!
If you want it, you got it. It's Detroit sports talk with attitude. It's the Knee Jerks with Eno and Big Al.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like at this time to introduce to you one of the finest running backs in the United States of America, and our number one pick, Barry Sanders.
Here's Isaiah. Let's see what we got. All the way up. Go!
We might not be in your car or on your transistor radio, but we're bringing you the best of Detroit sports past, present, and future. It's time for the Knee Jerks with two guys who know Detroit sports. Here's Greg Eno and Al Beaton.
It's May 4th, 2021. That means it's time for the Knee Jerks, Detroit Sports Talk with Eno and Big Al. I am the fully vaccinated Big Al. I hit 2 weeks post-vaccination tomorrow. I know Greg has already hit his 2 weeks, but before we get to all that, let's get the introductions out of the way. I am Al Beaton, Detroit-based blogger and podcaster. More podcaster at this point, because I haven't written in a few years. Joining me, as always, is the man who knows a lot of things about a lot of things, who has mastered the art of not pitching, but of yard work, and that would be Greg Eno of the Out of Bounds blog. Greg, you probably got all kinds of calluses on your hands from what you were telling me.
Still a little bit sore from a weekend of outdoors work around the homestead, but it was well worth it. The results were quite satisfying, but I'm not 38 anymore. I'm 50, almost 58. So that's
you could have fooled me.
And I tell you what, it's good. We do it, around this time every year, and it's always nice. And then the azalea bush blossomed almost right on cue yesterday. So the whole thing was
is being of help in these kind of jobs.
He provides comic relief. I think. But he was enjoying watching us work, as most dogs do. I am Greg, from the Out of Bounds, my Out of Bounds WordPress blog. You can catch that just about every week, pretty much on Mondays. My latest piece is about the NFL draft, which was held over the weekend. How the Lions, in my opinion, seem to have some sort of a direction now and a plan. We'll see if that comes to fruition, but that's at least my take on it. Yeah. We will be going with just, of course, as usual, no guests, but that no guest thing, Al, I think is going to end. I got a confirmation today. I haven't even told you this, that Eastern Michigan, the sports information people there, say that we can interview new basketball coach Stan Heath next Monday at our own volition, which we can record and, of course, run in the show on May 18th. Right. So we can put that in the can and then run it on the 18th. So new EMU head basketball coach Stan Heath, recently hired about less than a month ago, will join us, which is kind of exciting. We'll talk about one of the first interviews I think he's going to give, exclusive interviews. We'll talk about the program and his background and what he hopes to do at Eastern. So we'll be one of the first media folks to really get 30 to 45 minutes of his time. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, that's a cool get, Greg. Your Rolodex pays off again.
Yeah, we haven't really tapped into the Rolodex in recent weeks.
No. The pandemic has played a part in that as well.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll try to get back into the swing of things when it comes to guests going forward. I asked our old friend Ray Scott if he wanted to be on with Stan Heath. He said, no, let Stan have his own time. I said, fine. So we'll probably get Coach Scott to talk about the Pistons, maybe a post-mortem.
That really sounds good, because the coach is quite active online for someone his age.
I was going to say, for somebody who's 82, he's on Facebook like gangbusters, I tell you.
Yes.
And he wrote a book, or is writing a book too, I think.
Yes. He has mentioned that on Facebook. Yeah.
Yeah. So good for him. And I by the way, speaking of folks, octogenarians, how about, what do they call people in their 90s? What's that word?
Is that a sectogenarian?
I'm not sure. Maybe it is. That sounds right.
Yeah.
I heard from my old friend Jerry Green yesterday. Jerry's 92, and every once in a while he'll write me and say how much he liked one of my columns. He was praising me about my Calvin Johnson piece a couple months ago, and he was talking about Charlie Sanders and So it's always good to hear from Jerry. So thank you for that. And anyways, we got lots to talk about. We're going to be doing Tigers, Lions, maybe some Pistons in there. Not sure what else Al's got. The show notes escape me at this point. That's okay, because before we do any of it, we're going to play a game that we like to call Whose Birthday Is It, Maestro?
We baked you a birthday cake. If you get a tummy ache and you moan and groan and woe, don't forget we told you so. Happy birthday! Happy birthday!
Everybody knows how we play this game by now. I'll give Al a clue or two or three of an individual whose birthday it is today in the world of sports. And if Al can correctly guess that person within the first two clues, he will receive a gift certificate for Jack in the Box. So.
Oh boy, I get maybe I get some of those really nasty deep fried tacos. Exactly.
I got to tell you, this person was actually born yesterday. And the reason why is because I was looking through the people who were born today, and the list was so sparse and obtuse. Really? The biggest name was Ken Oberkfell, the old shortstop of the Cardinals. I wasn't going to give you that.
Yeah, that's a little out there, yes.
It's a little out there, so I decided to go with this person who was born yesterday.
Okay.
In 1964, so he's 57 today. He made his name in the world of hockey, I will tell you that. I will also tell you that he was played most of his career for the Flyers. Mm-hmm. Now, that may sound like a giveaway, but it's not, because the only other clue I'm going to give you is that he is related to a player who used to play for the Red Wings in the 70s. Oh,
good Lord. I would have preferred a question about Ken Oktoberfeld. So, which tells you where I stand on this question right now. I have no idea at this point. So I'm just going to pass, and maybe the second question will be give me a little more help, because right now I'm usually lost anyway, but I'm more lost than usual.
Well, once you find out who this is, you'll realize that clue I just gave you was pretty good.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, of course, yes. All right, with that, we have a lot to get to, and as always, time is short. So I think we're going to start with the Tigers this week, just because they really have been a hot-button topic over the past couple weeks, and I think there's just more to talk about than the draft, because there's only so much you can talk about players that you've barely watched play anyway, and mostly there's not much that has changed with the Lions. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about their philosophy and what the draft may have showed us rather than the players themselves, because I have no idea if a wide receiver out of USC drafted in the 4th round is going to be the next Anquan Bolden. So with that, let's get to the Tigers, who are essentially, the entire fan base, Greg, I think, is just getting exhausted with how bad this team has been. When we last spoke, they had come off a pretty rough road trip. Well, at least in the midst of that, I think it was like a 3-9, 3-10 road trip. At least in the middle of that road trip, they had swept the Astros and they looked fun doing it. It was an entertaining series. But since that sweep, Greg, they are 2-15. Their record now is 8-21, the worst in the major leagues. Their worst team in baseball right now. Their winning percentage is .276. We're in the realm of 2003, 2019 levels of bad here. They're worse than probably the team people are considering the biggest train wreck franchise. That is the Rockies, who last week fired their general manager for their ineptness. They're 10-18. They got a better record. So this is one of those things, Greg, where I think we all figured this team was not going. They weren't going to be good. We even talked about the first. I think the first week of the our first podcast after the season started, and that we're not expecting a good team, but we're expecting some entertainment. We're expecting to see some of the young players start to take a step up. See some interesting young players start to make their mark, kind of like what we're seeing with the Pistons right now. Unfortunately, nothing has gone right. They look awful. Starting pitching, I will say, has been decent. It's been okay. It's been good. Everything else, though, has just gone completely off the rails. Guys that they were expecting to step up haven't. Veterans they were expecting that would steady the ship have tanked. And AJ Hinch looks like he's grasping at straws right now, Greg. I mean, I expected a bad team, but I was expecting 90, 95 losses bad, not 110, 115 loss bad, which this team is starting to look like. And this is where we get to the point where, okay, we're what would you say, maybe 4.5 years into a rebuild, give or take. We were told that 2019 was going to be the nadir. That was rock bottom. We're going to start building up from here. And then going into this offseason, we were told, we're done tearing down. We're going to start building up. And I've seen none of what we've been sold so far. And it gets to the point where the fan base is losing patience. They are about ready to fire Al Avila into the moon. And they are extremely disappointed in the ownership of Chris Ilitch. This is a bad situation about to turn worse.
Yeah. Well, first of all, this is clearly a team that is the obvious statement is that they're not ready. I understand that, right. But the levels of which the team is hitting. Around 200 as a team through 30 games.
They're literally under the Mendoza. They were under the Mendoza line, for Christ's sake.
Yeah. But I will say this: I don't know how many games they'll win this year either. I think they might win. I was like you as far as the preseason predictions go. It looks like it's going to be closer to 100 losses. But you can still make leaps.
Even Bean's pissed off.
You can still make leaps from 100 losses to 500 if things fall into place.
Right.
You mentioned the pitching. Starting pitching certainly has been good enough on many nights to win if they had any sort of offensive firepower whatsoever. What has to happen, though, Al, a couple of things. Number one, there are some players on this roster that just are not going to be here, that just don't have it. Jacoby Jones, I'm looking at you. I'm looking at potentially Reyes. I'm looking at him.
Reyes, Willie Castro, Grayson Greiner. Almost all the young players have not made any kind of step forward, other than Candelario.
Right. So Scope's been a big, huge disappointment. This is a veteran guy. Yeah. He's not new. He's been around the big leagues. He's been successful in the big leagues. He's not old. He's not over the hill, at least not by his age.
No, he's 29. He should still have quite a bit left, you would think.
Right. So, it's a class in baseball, Al. You know this. You've been watching the game for as long as I have. These slumps, even with good teams, when you have a team-wide hitting slump, sometimes it's like the common cold. There's no cure for it. You just got to let it run its course. The problem, though, is that some of these players, who I mentioned, they're not established. They don't have anything on the resume to show to make us think that this is going to get much better.
Right.
The second thing you need to do with getting rid of some of these guys who just are either 4A players or worse is to start spending. I know it's not going to be a quick fix. You don't go from 62 wins to 95 wins in 1 year. I don't care how much you spend. But the Tigers need to accelerate this. They need to kickstart this. They've got the right manager. They've got the right coaching staff, I think. They've got good enough starting pitching. They need this offseason, which I understand from what I've read is supposed to be a pretty good offseason in terms of the free agent class that's available.
Right. They
need to go out. And the Chris Ilitch thing, everybody looks bad when you go through this kind of a thing. The knock on Ilitch is that he doesn't care, which is a bunch of baloney, and he doesn't have the same will that his dad had, which is, I don't know about that. All I know is that these folks who say that seem to conveniently forget the fact that when Mike Ilitch bought the team in 92, the first God knows how many years of that regime weren't very good. And when Ilitch bought the team in 92, how good were the Tigers between 92 and 04? He was
an awful owner for a decade. He was.
I mean, he went through a lot of bad hires in the front office, some bad
Radar Randy Smith, yes.
Joe Klein and all sorts of guys, McHale and Jerry Walker, and finally he landed on Dombrowski.
Once he got so embarrassed, he needed to do something.
So and frankly, so people tend to forget that, but they tend to only want to remember the big paychecks the big checks that he cut, the big splashy signings,
right.
And there was indeed a lot of fun baseball around here from like 2006 to 2014, with a couple minor exceptions, right. And it was World Series contenders, World Series appearances. So, but the Tigers need major league talent. The guys that are in the pipeline right now are still not ready. Torkelson and Green and Matt Manning.
Yeah, they're 2 to 3 years from being even if they make it, they're 2 to 3 years of being impact players.
And the fan base is 4 years into this, and I was looking back at the Astros history, starting like around 2011, 2012, when they really were at their nadir, where they were winning low 50s, 51 and 111, those kind of records. And they went, it was like 11, 12, 13 were like the worst. And then they crept up to, I think, 76 wins in 14.
Yeah.
And then they hired Hinch, and they went up to above 500, and then they took off from there. So this is now, I think, a situation where the Tigers need to inject big league talent. I'm not talking about shopping at the bargain bin like they've been doing the last 3 or 4 years. I'm talking about multi-year contracts. I'm not talking about these 10-year deals, $300 million. Those days are gone. But they need to start to commit multi-year contracts on genuine, good big league talent, because it's dragging. It's hit the Tigers have hit a rut, and it's which is putting it mildly. But if it wasn't the fact that they lost 114 games 2 years ago, but they did, and they lost. If you lose 114, that ought to be it. You ought to be doing nothing but going up from there. Now people are starting to get that 114 loss feeling again, and just 2 years later, that's just not acceptable. You can't lose that many games. I don't care what kind of rebuild you're going through. You got to inject big league talent. I was asking them to spend after the 18 season, because I thought that the division was potentially up for grabs. Because I thought I saw Cleveland regressing a little bit. I thought I saw a path where they could accelerate the rebuild a little bit and get themselves back in relevance. Didn't do it. So here we are. Al, I just think that they got to spend. And I know that that's not the panacea for everything, but in this situation, when you've got a fan base that's really starting to is at its wit's end, and is you're going to be back to the scenario pretty soon where you want to put fannies in the seats. It hasn't been about fannies in the seats lately because of COVID, but eventually it's going to be about getting people to the ballpark and getting people watching the games and so forth on Bally. And you can't do that if you're losing 110 games year after year after year. So I think that, and this, frankly, Al, the whole town needs an enema. They really need something to just make them excited again. I know we get excited, the fans get excited about the NFL draft for a couple of weeks in April. Okay, fine. Red Wings aren't going anywhere. Pistons aren't going anywhere in terms of the playoffs. The town needs something. And, it's a long season. The baseball season is the longest of them all. And when your team is losing, getting their brains beat in every night, that long summer just drags on and on. And these games just, you look at your team and they're 29 and 71, and it just, it takes a lot. It sucks a lot out of you if you're a fan. So I think that they badly need to hold a press conference sometime next winter and hold up a Tigers jersey in front of some star. And I don't know who it is yet, because I haven't looked at the class closely enough. Well,
the big class, there's a lot of big name shortstops going to be available. Which is a position of need with this team. Mm-hmm. They do. I agree. They need to it's time to make a splash. You got to do something. No, obviously not. There's nothing to do about this year, season, I should say. Right. But it's. But the offense, they aren't going to remain this bad offensively. It'd be almost impossible to be this bad. Yeah. But the numbers so far, a little more than a month into the season, are staggeringly bad. They're literally hitting as a team 195 under Mendoza line. The on-base percentage is 255. They are slugging 338. Their OPS is under 600 at 593. Every one of those numbers is the worst in Major League Baseball. They're 29th in runs, 28th in walks. Their offensive WAR is negative. It's negative 2.8 going by Fangraphs. That's like impossible. Yet here we are. When you look at numbers like OPS plus, which is adjusted for parks and the league as a whole, and 100 is average. 100 is, I believe, league average, replacement level, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Miguel Cabrera's OPS plus is 27.
Right.
Victor Reyes is -1.
Right.
That's how bad this team has been offensively. When your team RBI leader is Akil Baddoo, I think he has 13 right now, and he hasn't hit in 3 weeks. And his strikeout percentage is about 40 to 45%. He strikes out almost half the time at this point. He's hit the rookie wall when it comes to pitchers have finally figured out what he can and can't do. They need some guys to step up. But the problem is, when you look at the roster right now, who's going to carry this team for any significant amount of time? There is no one. That guy 5 years ago would have been Miguel Cabrera, but he's no longer capable of that. I mean, when you're asking like Scope or Ramos or Goodrum, Candelario, they're not capable of it. They just aren't. These are all guys who would be the Craig Monroes of a good team, if you know what I'm saying. Kind of like that. The guy who should be batting 7th in the order, and they're asking these guys to do things they're not really capable of. And let's not even get me going on playing guys out of position, like you're asking Jonathan Scope to play first base, and he's literally learning the job at the major league level after spending his entire career as a first baseman. And then, would you be surprised that maybe it's hurting his offense because he's learning a new position? It doesn't surprise me one bit. So there's a lot of issues here, Greg, but the problem is that they needed some of the young guys like Castro and Reyes and Candelario and just to step up and maybe take that next step to become legitimate big league starters. The only one who has done that is Candelario, and even he's essentially, he'll hit 270, give you a 750 OPS. He's a guy, not a guy you build around, and this team really, really lacks guys you can build around on offense specifically. And the ones you've mentioned realistically are at least 2 years away. I mean, I'm not, people say, Torkelson and Green and Meadows and a couple other guys. All those guys are either at single A or double A. And if they sniff the bigs, it's going to be in September this year. And, so then we're going into 2022. Maybe Torkelson, but I'm not expecting guys like, someone like Riley Green, unless he really, really blows up this year. I wouldn't expect him for at least a year after that. So then we're talking 2023, 2024, and all of a sudden your rebuild is like 7 years in, 8 years in. And that's asking an awful, awful lot of a fan base, especially a fan base that suffered from essentially 1988 to 2005 was some of the worst baseball this franchise ever saw. I guess the thing is, at this point, Al Avila has not shown enough at this point to have any kind of confidence in his team building abilities. It's not hard. When you have the first overall pick in the first round, that's kind of a hard pick to screw up. But when you start looking at some of the trades, and everybody brings up the Justin Verlander trade, where that trade is completely blown up in his face, there's no confidence at all that this man is capable of building a winning baseball team right now.
We've talked about this before, and maybe when we first started talking about it, it was a little bit premature, maybe. But now I don't think it is, and that's what I'm going to say is that if you look, you mentioned nobody being able to carry the team offensively, and that's painfully obvious. But beyond that, Al, I was talking about a little while ago about looking at the Astros and kind of like their ascension. And I've said this I don't know how many times before. The Tigers, and I'm not trying to be one of these fans that are, always complaining all the time about Al Avila, and I, frankly, I'm kind of neutral on him. I've been neutral.
Yeah, we haven't really harped on him that much on this podcast.
I've been
really
neutral
haven't.
on Avila for a while now because I just feel like the jury is still out. But if you look at the Astros of the 2011 and beyond era, you looked at that roster and you saw guys, even though they were losing a lot of games, you saw guys who would later become the core of those great Astro teams about 4 or 5 years later.
Right.
That became all-stars and so forth, adding title winners and what have you. You look at the Tigers, 77, 78, 79, and you saw in there was the core, what would end up be the core of the 84 team, Morris and Trammell and Whitaker and Gibson and Parrish.
And by 1979, they were above 500 team.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you look at the 2003, 2004, 2005 Tigers,
and
there were still a few core people from the 2006 team, guys like Bonderman, Monroe, and so forth. There are a few of them were sprinkled on the roster, but what happened there was Ilitch went ahead and accelerated things by signing the likes of Pudge and Maglio and hoodwinking the Mariners out of Guillen.
Yep.
And then eventually signing Kenny Rogers and guys like that in fortifying the roster, and that's why that came together so quickly. Yeah. That's why they went from 119 losses to the World Series just 3 years later. So you look at this situation, this roster, and the players that are on it, and unlike the Astros of which I speak, I don't see a lot of guys, Al, that, or maybe I don't see any guys that you could point to and say, you know what, I think that I'm going to pick 4 or 5 players that are going to be on the next Tigers World Series contending team. That's going to be the core of the next era of great Tigers baseball. I don't know. You can't find them. There's nobody there that screams out to you, oh, he's a keeper for sure. He's on the team. For sure he's on the team. There, especially when you talk about position players. Now, you might be able to pick out a few on the pitching side, maybe. Yeah. But that's what scares me about, and I've said this before, Al, that's what scares me about this whole roster scenario of the Tigers, is I'm not seeing signs that there's a core that usually by now you've identified, and you mentioned the Verlander trade of 2017. Usually by now, 4 years later, when they started to sell players off, the fire sale, by now you've identified a handful of players that is going to be the core of the next great Tigers team. Yeah. And the other thing, Al, that scares me or that makes me discouraged is you look around the division. You see what the White Sox have done. Now, you can complain all you want about hiring La Russa, and that's another story. But you look at what the White Sox have done. You look at the Twins and the Royals have done. Okay, the Royals are in first place. These teams they've been able to somehow figure it out without losing 110 games, without losing 115 games. That's the thing about the Tigers, Al. There's been so many 100-loss seasons since 1989. And some of these seasons are historically bad. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of them, really a lot of them. I mean, when you look at the history of the franchise, the last 32 years, there's been like 7 or 8 bad teams. And the first blush, you may think, well, that's not so bad. Well, it actually is pretty bad. When you have that many 100-plus loss seasons in that time frame, then you become now obviously they interrupted that with that stretch where they were winning the division every year. Right. But beside those 4 years, you've got the makings of a franchise that is almost like the Pirates of the post Jim Leland years, where they were just getting their brains beat in every night. Yeah. I think that's what makes the fans, Al, edgy, frankly. Yeah. Is they see the other teams in the division, in their own division, not even forget the rest of baseball, but just in their own division, figure it out. Yeah. And that's That's a fair criticism of Al Avila, is to compare him. Sometimes when you just compare him to, Dave Dombrowski or something like that, that's not necessarily apples and oranges. But it is fair to compare the fate of the Tigers now in the last 4 or 5 years versus their divisional rivals. And I don't see the Royals. I never saw the Royals lose 110 games. I never saw the White Sox lose 110 games. I never saw the Twins lose 110 games. These teams now, they may not have been good, but they didn't. They weren't historically bad either. And that's a fair criticism of Al Avila. Is wait a minute now, how come these other teams in our own division? How come they're able to find these young players? Young, good players. Mm-hmm. How come they've been able to do it and the Tigers haven't? That's a fair criticism.
Yeah. Oh, a lot of it, again, I think we can go back. This all started on the wrong foot with the Verlander trade, because we had breaking news today about a couple players in that trade that are injured again. The return on investment on the Verlander trade has been I wouldn't say destroyed the rebuild, but it sure as hell scaled it back immeasurably, because today was announced Franklin Perez. He was literally the crown jewel of the deal. A young right-handed pitcher who was pitching above his age range. I think he was in Double-A and he was 19. Since the deal went down in 2017, he has appeared in 27 innings across 9 games since the Tigers traded for him. And it was announced today that he would start the Whitecap season on the injured list again due to a right shoulder capsule defect. Whatever that means, I don't know. But it does mean that they're sending him out to see a specialist, I think in Los Angeles. And that's never a good thing when you're sending a pitcher to see a specialist when it comes to a shoulder or elbow issue. In this case, it's the shoulder. Yeah. And for that matter, Daz Cameron, who was we were sold as going to be the center fielder of the future, and has pretty much proven he can't even be the center fielder of the Mud Hens at this point. He was also going to start the season on the IL in Toledo because for some reason he has a fractured wrist. We don't know why or how. So he's not going to play anytime soon. And so there goes one option they might have to maybe bring up this sometime to maybe spark something on the outfield offense. And then this Jake Rogers has essentially become an afterthought at this point. He's been bypassed by a few prospects. We were told he was going to be the best defensive catcher in baseball, and he could just, hit a few home runs, and he'd be the Tigers catcher for a decade. And he couldn't even beat out Grayson Greiner in spring training to be the backup catcher. And Greiner's awful. Greiner is not a major league ball player, yet he's been the Tigers' backup for over 2 years now, which says volumes about what the Tigers think of Rogers. Plus, they took a catcher out of Ohio State in last year's draft in the second round. Now, he's probably going to be the next wonder boy behind the plate. So, and then you factor in the J.D. Martinez trade, which literally got them nothing. I mean, it got them minor league roster filler. Sergio Alcantara and a couple of bodies. There's been literally very little that has come from the trades. Now, Willie Castro was shown as a success story for one of Avila's trades, and that says volumes. They got Castro. They flipped that center fielder to Cleveland a couple years ago, and if Castro is considered a victory, and he hasn't proven he has proven that he can't field at a major league level. And last year he put up nice offensive numbers that got him fourth in Rookie of the Year voting. But if you look at the analytics of his of Willie Castro's numbers last year, he was so good because his batting average and balls in play was like 450. That is completely unsustainable, and now we're seeing the more true Willie Castro this season. Well, I don't think Willie Castro was bad offensively as he's been so far, but he is not the offensive ball player we saw last year, because there was a lot of luck last year in his hitting 349. He is more like a guy, if he pans out, he is a guy who can hit you 270 and maybe get you 10 to 15 home runs. He's not the guy he was last year, and the analytics are starting to show that. So there's been very few, if any, victories in any trades of this franchise, Greg. And I think, say what you will about Dave Dombrowski, the guy knew when to cut bait on prospects. Yes, the atmosphere was different back then, where it was I think teams are a little more willing to deal in certain ways, because right now you can't trade anybody for prospects anymore, because prospects are so highly valued, but basically because of money reasons, because of contract. They won't be able to hit free agency until they're pushing 30. Yeah. But give Dave Dombrowski credit; he was able to, because you remember that Cameron Maybin and Andrew Miller were like some of the top prospects in baseball, and then they threw in like 3 or 4 other pretty good prospects, at least according to the experts, and that got them Miguel Cabrera and Dontrell Willis. They essentially got themselves a Hall of Fame player. And Miller and Maybin have had okay major league careers, but nowhere near the career of Miguel Cabrera. Cameron Maybin's a guy, and Andrew Miller had a couple good seasons out of a bullpen.
Right.
So, and other deals, like you mentioned, Dombrowski was able to steal Carlos Guillen. He was able to steal Placido Polanco. He was able to think of the pitching, some of the pitching he was able to pick up.
Yeah.
Basically for trading prospects. Unfortunately, now I don't think Al Avila's hands are tied because, one, his prospects aren't panning out, so they're not impressing anybody.
Right.
And obviously, two, that the market has changed, and we don't know anything about Ilitch. We have a couple beat writers in town who are insisting that Ilitch will spend money when the time is right. Well, this is a case right now where I need to see that money thrown down and those dotted lines starting to be signed by free agents and legit big league ball players before I buy into the Ilitch will spend money when the time is right, because, as you mentioned earlier, the market did show there was, this was a good time to zig when everybody else was zagging and maybe snap up some legit big league players like Kansas City. They signed Carlos Santana, who's been a productive ball player for him so far. So this whole rebuild, when you factor into how this rebuild seems to be stuck in the mud, and then you got the Red Wings who are, lost in the, they're better this year, but they're instead of being historically bad, they're just bad. Then you got the Pistons who blew everything up, and then you got the Lions who blew up their front office. So things are pretty damn dire right now, and we're stuck for the next 3 to 4 months of nothing but Tigers baseball. That's not going to be fun.
You mentioned Chris Ilitch the notion of Chris Ilitch will spend when the time is right.
Yeah.
The thing is, Al, is that a couple of years ago when we would say that, when we would say when the time was right, the assumption was, or at least the vision was, what that meant was that there would be a core of players, a core of young players, and then you would use free agency to kind of, fortify, which is the way it should be. You have a core of guys, you identify a core of players, and then if you're going to spend and open up the pocketbook, then it is to get guys that are probably in their late 20s or even a little bit past that, and even on the wrong age of 30, to kind of fortify and guys who are stars, to really kind of balance the whole thing out. That's what a couple of years ago, when what we all meant when we said Chris Ilitch will spend when the time is right. Unfortunately, the definition of when the time is right has been skewed, bastardized to now mean, now it's frantic. Now it's you got to spend because please give us big league players. Please field a team that is not garbage. I'm looking at the Chicago. I got the White Sox thing open here on Baseball Reference, Al. Just indulge me for a second. You got guys like Nick Madrigal. He's the second baseman. He's 24 years old. He's hitting .313.
Yeah.
You've got Andrew Vaughn, their left fielder, hitting .275. He's 23. You've got Luis Roberts, who's 23, their center fielder, hitting .316.
Yeah.
You've got Yermin Mercedes, their DH, who's 28, who's hitting .395.
Yeah.
You've got guys who are, and then you've got a nice blend of established guys like Jose Abreu,
Anderson.
Tim Anderson.
Yeah.
Okay. Guys who've been around a little bit. Yoan Moncada, their third baseman, is 26. Mm-hmm. He's hitting .264.
Yeah.
Okay, what happened? It's like, where were these players the White Sox are now fielding? Where were these guys 3 years ago? I never heard of half of these guys. And all of a sudden, here they are now on the big league stage, more than holding their own. The White Sox are 15-12. La Russa, that was weird, but that's another story. Forget the manager. Forget the manager for now. Look at the roster. I can see why La Russa wanted the job, by the way. Look at the roster, and where were these guys in 2018 when the Tigers were starting their rebuild? And where were these guys in 2019 when the Tigers were losing 114 games?
Yeah.
Where were these guys? All of a sudden, here they are. We're here, and we're just kicking your ass. And I don't understand that.
And it's worth noting that a few of these guys they got when they traded their ace, Chris Sale. Yeah, I think there was another pitcher or two they were able to unload, and the White Sox did the rebuild right, essentially.
Yeah, I think it's a tale of two rebuilds, and I think that that's what's frustrating the fans, Al. I could tell you that's what's frustrating the fans.
Yeah.
Is they look around their own division. It's not like they're in the AL East. It's not like the Tigers are playing with the big boys, with the Red Sox and the Yankees and the Blue Jays. It's not that. There are these other mid-market to small market teams in the Central Division, and the Tigers are I can't even keep pace with those teams.
Yeah. And
that's what's really getting people frustrated, and I understand it. Because it's a legitimate critique. It's not a fashionable critique. Well, I'm just going to critique Al Avila because that seems to be the thing to do. No, this is a legitimate critique of the Tigers' situation versus the White Sox. And I know if you're an Avila apologist, you're going to come back at me and say, well, every situation is different. Well, okay, but it doesn't speak to the fact that the White Sox were also not very good. My point is they didn't have to go down to 115 losses to make this happen.
Right.
And that's what I don't get is why the Tigers always have to sink to such depths before they're able to. And at least with the 03 thing, that was bad, granted. But they signed Pudge. They signed the outfielder from Minnesota. I can't remember what his name was. Then they signed Magler.
And they had hired a general manager who had a track record of success because he had turned around at the time Florida, now Miami.
Somebody made a good point on social media, which I rarely ever say. You'll rarely hear me say that sentence, but somebody said, I don't think Al Avila would be a GM anywhere but in Detroit. And I know we were talking about Jeff Blashill a couple of weeks ago about how Blash would probably never be a coach in the NHL, head coach, other than in Detroit.
Right.
I tend to agree. It's not just his age. It's not just Al's age, which would put him up beyond the eight ball because he's past 60. But I think there's a shred of truth to that. He's been a loyal soldier. He's been with the organization for about 20 years now, and he's been loyal. He's been a good guy. He's been a good soldier, and he hasn't caused any problems for the franchise. He hasn't done anything, embarrassing. He hasn't said anything off color. It's funny because as much as he talks, he hasn't said anything that's been untoward, and that's fine. That's great, but I think that whoever said that was right. If he were to be removed, he probably wouldn't get another GM job because of what would he be able to hang his hat on. And I fear, Al, that this situation is untenable unless they go out and get people. Now, that's easier said than done as well, because if you're going to be starting to bid now against some other big players, big-time players, big spenders, if you will, those big spenders are probably going to be more attractive than the Tiger situation. So you're going to probably have to end up overpaying. Yeah. But I think at this point the fans don't care about that.
Yeah.
I think they just want to see a big league roster, and that's what you mentioned. You've many times you've said about the Pistons situation. Well, they're losing, but they're exciting. I can see some pieces to the puzzle. I can see some young...
remember, they signed a legit NBA player in Jeremy Grant. who is a guy who he may not be a superstar, but he is a guy who will be there when,
he's a borderline all-star.
when this team when this team should be turning things around. The Tigers don't have that kind of a player or two.
There's nobody, Al, that's going to get you to get excited to watch the games. You don't flip the game on to say, I'm going to see so-and-so. The Purdue thing lasted for about 2 weeks, as we knew it would be. Yep. There's nobody that's that makes you want to turn that TV on, unless you just love the Tigers, which some people do. They love the Tigers, and God bless them. No matter how many games they lose.
I turn them on at this point. It's just habit, and it's background noise when I'm doing something else. I think a lot of people are pretty much the same way. Yeah. I should make more of a point just to listen to Dan Dickerson, because he is not nearly the shill that I find the TV broadcast to be. Right. He actually shows a little disgust with what he's seeing right now. From what I've heard of him, and plus what I've seen people describe online listening to Dan Dickerson compared to listening to Matt Shepard, which is two completely different, two different broadcasts, I think, at times. But it's beyond frustrating, and this year is going to be a wash. I mean, at the very least, I think I was hoping for kind of like we just said with the Pistons, where you're seeing the glimmers of stuff, and we're not seeing the glimmers of anything. We're just seeing essentially the season so far has just been dumping water on those glimmers and putting them out. It's been that sad and depressing to watch. And what's really funny is we were talking, Michael Fulmer could not get out of the first inning against Boston, and the Tigers are down 4-0 in the second. And that's what's up, because Fulmer has been one of the bright spots this year. He's looked like a major league pitcher again. Even though it's against small sample sizes, and he's not really that stretched out. They're only getting 3 to 4 innings out of him. But they go to Boston. Boston's been no great shakes, and it looks like Boston's going to blow them out again. So, oh my God, I don't know, Greg. I just don't know. It's there's very few bright spots right now. And it's funny, I got the Pistons game on in the background, and that's a competitive ball game. They'll probably end up losing, but it's going to be a competitive ball game, and it'll be fun to watch, and there'll be some excitement involved. And right now, I think you said it, the Tigers are just not fun to watch, and we've said it over and over on this podcast. It's one thing to be bad; it's another thing to be bad and boring.
Right.
And that's what the Tigers are right now. And the fan base is really starting to. Their hope is on fumes right now. It's that even if the things do improve, the season's over. Yeah. We're not even going to get that. It's August and there are like a few games within 500, and they're still in the wild card hunt. We're not even going to get that this year. Now we're just treading water till the trade deadline, see if they can get anything for a few of these players, and maybe we'll see a few of the young guys come up. Like when's Matt Manning going to get the call, or maybe Torkelson or Meadows or Green will get hot, and maybe we'll get lucky to see him in August or something. But right now I think we're looking at 2 months of what right now. Even they will get better, and they will have some games with streaks where they'll look like a legit major league team, but we're still looking at a 100-loss season right now, and that's unacceptable at this point, this far into a rebuild, pure and simple. And
here's the other thing.
I'm ready for heads to roll, Greg. I am ready for heads to roll, and we know that's not going to happen.
Well, I mean, that's another thing too. Is people equate Al Avila not being fired yet with Chris Ilitch not caring. They look at those two things as being the same thing. Yeah. But back to your statement about being unacceptable and so forth. Yeah. The one thing you and I haven't even talked about is that the Tigers themselves, from Al Avila on down, have told everyone.
Yes, you're right.
Okay, we're coming out of the darkness now.
Yes, you're right.
We're emerging. This is the rough part is over, is behind us. Now we're ready to kind of start to think about winning again, and they've said that, not the media. It hasn't been like the media or the pundits or the fans. It's been them, the Tigers organization, that has said, "Okay, we're ready now. Okay, it's time now." Well, by that definition, they're violating their own part of the bargain, because this is not anywhere near acceptable at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will be at least to throw a little devil's advocate in there, and that is, yes, the pandemic probably did set things back by at least a year, maybe more. That's because there were literally no minor leagues last year,
right.
So there was not a lot of player development going on. So you got guys who lost. Yeah, you got guys who lost a year, essentially a year of experience in minor league ball, and maybe a guy like Green or Manning would be that much closer to the big leagues if they had a minor league season last year. We do have to admit that. It still doesn't excuse the point that we're seeing very little progress from a lot of these players, especially when they get to the big leagues and they look completely and totally overwhelmed for the most part. And that's, it feels like we've been sold a bill of goods. But then again, I think this entire regime that's all they've done to this point is sell us a bill of goods. And if nothing happens this year, this season I should say, when it comes to making changes in the front office, this has to be a make or break offseason. And I hate to say that because we said the same thing about Bob Quinn. And look at the disaster that make or break offseason turned into with the Lions. And it's going to take the Lions a couple seasons to dig out of the bad decisions, bad short-term decisions Bob Quinn made in an attempt to keep his job. And I think that's got to be a big fear, is that, okay, if Avila has been, realizes that, boy, I got to kickstart this rebuild. I'm kind of concerned about the moves he might try to make that may actually come to backfire very, very quickly. That could turn into another Upton or Zimmerman or something.
Well, they need big league talent. I mean, that's just all there is to it. I don't care how they get it. I don't care. I don't think the fans care how they get it. They want, I was opposed to just firing Al Avila because I thought you just don't do that in the middle of a rebuild. You don't,
right?
Who's going to come here and who's going to wave a magic wand? And I still believe that. I still believe that there's nobody that's going to come in here and all of a sudden everything's going to be okay. This situation is bad and it's getting worse. And that's the thing. And obviously, how many times have you and I said when you make these trades, and we say always be on the side of getting the established player, never put yourself in a position where you are the one receiving the prospects. Always be on the other side of the coin. And we're seeing it right now. As much as the White Sox have seemed to have found a really good nucleus of players, that they can be scary.
That feels like the exception to the rule. It's an outlier.
Right. They could be scary, the White Sox. They really could.
Yeah.
But they need some more pitching. But still, the Tigers, this is they didn't get it. They're so far that the prospect scenario, trading the established guy for the prospects has not at all panned out. And that's why we don't. We always say, don't put your eggs in the basket of the prospects. Now, sometimes you have to when you're so bad. I get it,
right? Yeah.
And you indeed are rebuilding. But this is what happens, and that's why a 3 to 5 year rebuild can take 8 to 10 years.
Yeah. If we're lucky at this point, I'm thinking. All right. With that, why don't we move on to question 2 of the birthday game, where I'm already anticipating I'm not going to get any tasty grease-soaked tacos.
Well, you never know. 1964, so he played from 84 to 99 was his playing career in the NHL. He played almost exclusively for the Flyers, although he finished his career with a couple other teams in the NHL. He is a nephew of a former Red Wing captain of the 1970s, and also the son of a former Red Wing player. And he was not an offensive player.
Oh, okay. I am completely lost here. I really am. What was the captain clue again? The former Wings captain.
He's the nephew of a Red Wings captain of the 1970s, and the son of an NHL player who also played for the Red Wings in the 1970s.
I can tell you right, I have no clue.
Famous hockey family, pretty famous hockey family.
Yeah, and I'm drawing a complete blank. I think it has a lot to do where the Red Wings have really been on my mental back burner most of this year. Okay. I'm completely at a loss, and you'll probably tell me after question 3, and I'm like, oh. How could I forget that? But right now, I don't know, so I'm just going to have to make my own tacos, it looks like. So, all right, with that, we'll get to answer question 3 after we talk a little Pistons. We'll save the lines for the last, so we want to end this podcast on a somewhat up note. This has been a pretty down. A lot of our podcasts have been downers lately. But I kind of wanted to talk a little Pistons, specifically because last night was... it was a really, really strange night. One of the strangest in Pistons memory. Obviously, the Pistons they're not using the word tank, but that's exactly what they're doing. And they've become more blatant about it over the past week or two, Greg, with, Jeremy Grant has been sitting quite a bit with either, for rest, quote unquote rest. Mason Plumlee has been playing less and less. Wayne Ellington has pretty much been planted on the end of the bench. For the vast majority of games of late, the Pistons have been playing the roster. They're playing a 24-year-olds and younger roster for the most part. They literally are playing all the kids, and in some ways, that's a bad thing because they got some pretty talented kids. Specific guy like the team. They are a better team with Isaiah Stewart on the court rather than Mason Plumlee, and Plumlee's had a pretty good year. But last night was really strange because you had two fan bases, and they were both desperate for a loss. It's completely desperate for the loss. Obviously, the Pistons fan base is, they're in full tank mode, and but Orlando, who were in town last night, they pivoted to tank mode at the trade deadline when they realized this isn't working, we're going to blow it up. And they've been in tank mode since the trade deadline, so they come into town, and their roster is full of waiver wire pickups, 10-day contracts. They were essentially playing a very young, very inexperienced roster as well in a road game last night. Well, the Pistons were able to out-tank the Magic. They lost 119-112. It was actually kind of an interesting game, even if the Pistons did lose. The Pistons are now 19-46. They now have what's big about this, it does give them they have a 2-game lead in the win column. I believe the Pistons have 19 wins. Magic have 21 wins now. That's a big deal in the tankathon. So right now, the only team worse than the Pistons right now in the NBA are Houston, and they're not going to be able to catch up with Houston. Houston is their record. They've gone into a spiral. I think they had a streak at one point. They lost like 15, 16 games in a row, something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, they've gone whole hog into the tank. Right. So, but regardless of that, the Pistons are doing pretty well themselves tanking. But regardless, now the Pistons are in good shape for to get a top 4, top 5 selection, and in a draft that looks like it's only 4 or 5 players deep when it comes to the elite talent. But I guess what we have to remember about this isn't like, okay, they finished second worst record in the league, they're going to get the second pick. Right. The lottery's going to bounce that way. It doesn't work out that way. Right now, their biggest odds, I put the odds in the show notes. Right now, if you bet on the Pistons what draft pick they're going to get, odds are their highest odds they're going to get the 5th round. They're going to get the 5th overall pick, even though they'll end up with the second worst record. That's how goofy these rules have become with playoff lottery. Yeah. If they finish second worst in the league, the chance of getting the first overall pick is 14%. It drops to 13 and change for the second overall pick. The odds are, even if the Pistons tank the rest of the year, lose all their games, end up with the second worst record in the NBA, they are still most likely to end up with the 5th or 6th overall pick, which is just how ridiculous the draft lotteries have become. I mean, you're essentially tanking your season with a 14% chance of hopes of getting the first overall pick, which is probably going to be Cade Cunningham out of Oklahoma State. So it is bonkers. At the very least, though, the Pistons do have a 52% chance, Greg, of getting a top 4 pick. I mean, I understand why teams are doing this. I understand why the Pistons are doing this. I mean, James Edwards III, the beat writer for The Athletic, he has said he doesn't think Plumlee or Grant are even going to play at all this year. He thinks they're done. That's how they find that it's time. We're going to tank. We're in a position to get that draft pick. We are throwing in the towel, which is a damn shame, but that's how the NBA has set things up. I hate rooting for a team to lose, Greg, but that's what we're doing. It's counterintuitive. I hate doing it, but I understand why, which is why I just hate draft lotteries so much, because it leads to stuff like this. It leads to teams getting screwed in the draft, like what happened to the Wings last year, who were legitimately bad. The Wings are bad because they were good for a quarter century. And it finally caught up with them. And for that matter, the Pistons legitimately tried to win for a decade, couldn't do it, and said, "Well, it works for everybody else. We have to tank too." So I hate draft lotteries with a passion, but I understand the reason why a team like the Pistons are being forced to tank, because the rules are forcing them to do so, and the rules suck. I wish they would just go back to, Greg, worst record gets the first pick, second worst record gets the second pick, and none of this ping pong balls and lottery picks and bouncing teams up and down the pick list. It's awful. I hate it. I just don't know what else to say other about lotteries. It's awful.
Yeah, there's been a lot of whenever I think of draft lotteries, I think of that notion of the cure is worse than the ailment.
Yes, that's a good way to put it.
And I don't know that there was a big problem with the way things were done traditionally.
Right.
I think that I don't know that the lottery necessarily solves anything that it was supposed to solve, other than like what you said. What it's done is it's screwed teams over, at least in the other way of doing things. The traditional way of the worst gets the first and so on.
Right.
You can get other teams getting screwed, unless they made a bad trade themselves, unless they traded their pick, but that's on them. You weren't at the whim of fate, which is what this is. Like, just pure dumb luck is what it is. And I know that I wonder if there was really ever a problem to begin with, because if you're a team that's lousy and you're going to kind of sandbag your way through the season in hopes of getting a top pick, well, who does that hurt? Who does that hurt? Who else gets hurt in that scenario? I mean, nobody's getting screwed over in that scenario. I mean, really, they're really not. I mean, if you want to, if you want to do that, which I don't really even think that, I'm even making a leap of faith that even happened. Number one, if you want, let's just, for sake of argument, let's just say that yes, teams would do that. Well, who are they really hurting? What's the harm in that? Because first of all, the draft picks aren't always going to be, There's this. Don't forget Sam Bowie and Well,
look at the 76ers. Who literally they didn't do the Pistons tank, where the Pistons have some legit NBA players on their roster. They literally blew out everybody and played nothing but kids, and were winning under 10 games for a few seasons in a row. It was literally unwatchable basketball. And out of all that, they got essentially 2 NBA players, 1 MVP quality player, but they really they still haven't won. They haven't won anything yet after they finished tanking, and so it's I think you nailed it when you said the cure was worse than the actual disease when it came to this. Because how many teams were really truly tanking? before they started all this weighted lottery mess. And plus it leads to conspiracy theories when you get stuff like, how did Cleveland get to draft their hometown boy and their hometown player and LeBron James, and when they just happened to win the lottery when he came out, that's what the stuff leads to.
The urban legend about Pat Ewing and how
either the envelope was frozen or it had a little bend in it. Yeah,
I just don't know why this is better. I don't know. I don't understand in what way this is better. Having teams getting screwed over. The Red Wings got screwed over. Was it last year they got screwed over? They had the worst record by up here,
far.
They fell way down here.
And then a team that made the play-in games won the first overall pick in the Rangers.
That's not right either. That's what I don't understand. Why is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Under the traditional way, the worst that could happen is a team loses purposely, which I don't even think that even is possible. Okay, a team does that, fine. They get the number 1 pick, fine, whatever. How is that worse than what we have now, which is what you mentioned, play-in winners get to pick higher than teams that finish out of the playoffs, and you get screwed over by a ping pong ball or something. Why is that? Why is that okay? Why are all the foibles of the draft lottery okay, and the other one, the original way, isn't okay? That's what I'm trying to do like a pro and con thing here. I'm not seeing where there's so many pros to this lottery system that it overwhelmingly you would say, oh, that's way better than when they used to do it, when the worst team got the first pick and the second worst team got the second pick. I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing because it just seems like, Al, there are more instances of teams getting screwed over by this than there ever were of again, when the Lakers had the number 1 pick in '79 and they picked Irvin Johnson, or the second, whatever they picked Irvin Johnson. Right. Well, that was because they made a trade. They had made a trade with, I don't even know what team it was, who was silly enough to give them their first round draft pick. The 74 Cowboys had made a trade with the pitiful Houston Oilers, who they traded him, like I think Billy Parks and Tony Smith, for the number 1 pick, and the Oilers were off of had 2 straight 1-13 seasons, and that pick in '74 was the first overall. The Cowboys were a perennial playoff team, championship caliber team, getting to pick first overall in the NFL draft. Well, that's terrible. They picked Ed Tuzal Jones, by the way. That's terrible, but that's the fault of the Oilers. That's on the Oilers. That's not on the league. That's not on the system. The system didn't do that. Right. The Oilers did that. So I don't understand why we have to have this system of dumb luck. It's a show is what it is. It's a circus to make it appear as if it's equitable. That's the funny thing now. That's the irony. The irony is this is designed to be equitable and fair, and it's not. Yep. And more often than not, it's not. And frankly, Al, that takes. See, they didn't think this through. When fans of teams that are awful, one of the things they look forward to is, well, at least we get a top draft pick. Right. Why? Well, that means a new player is going to come in that's going to revitalize the franchise. That's going to pump some energy back into the fan base. It's going to make our team exciting again. Well, you don't have that now because the excitement of having the worst record, if you want to call it that, is muted by the fact that the realization that your chance of getting that number 1 overall pick isn't really that good. Yeah. So why should you get excited? You mentioned tankathon. Well, how excited? What is really at stake here? A few more percentage points?
That's literally what's at stake. A few percentage points.
I don't understand why that's considered better than what we had.
Yeah. And you got to remember, smart front offices make smart draft picks, and they don't necessarily have to be top. We saw that with the Pistons this past year when they found 3 rotation pieces at 7, 16, and 19. only one of them was a quote-unquote lottery pick, and the better players were the lower-picked ones.
Okay, Isaiah Thomas and Kelly Tripucka first-rounders, fine.
Right.
But where was Bill Laimbeer drafted? Where was Vinnie Johnson drafted? Where was Dennis Rodman drafted? Where was John Sally drafted?
Yeah.
Okay? I mean, you're right. You don't have the Steelers, back to the 74 draft, the Steelers drafted four Hall of Famers in that one draft. Swan, Stallworth, Lambert, and Mike Webster. Four Hall of Famers, and they weren't all the first round.
Yeah.
They weren't all the first round. So I don't know. I'm at my wits' end with this lottery thing. There
are several ways sports are broken.
The excitement that the lottery brings isn't to the fan base of the crappy teams. It's to the fan base of the average teams. They're the ones that get excited. They say, we're bad. We're not so bad.
Yeah.
We still have a shot at getting. We have almost as much of a shot of getting a top pick as these doofuses who are in last place. That's not the way it should work.
No.
The excitement should be the other way. The excitement should be with the teams, the fan base of the teams that have been suffering. They're the ones that should be excited, not the play-in teams. The play-in teams shouldn't have wake up on Christmas morning with a top draft choice. That's not the way that's supposed to work.
Yep. Yeah, pro sports are broken when it comes to this because baseball has its own issues with tanking. As we're fans of a team that's been tanking for almost 5 years at this point. But the problem with that is teams overly value prospects because of how they need for a team to be successful and not have a $200 million plus payroll. They need young players to outperform their contracts. No, that's how that's how teams like Tampa, for example, are successful because they've had some young players who, if there was a true fee market and these guys are allowed to hit free agency in their 20s rather than when they're pushing 30, if some of these guys who would be 25, 26 years old hitting free agency for the first time, they would, but instead they have the arbitration rules and they're under team control for the 7 years, I think, something to that effect. And that artificially deflates how much they would be able to make if they hit free agency went to the open market. And that allows teams to have very competitive teams at a low rate. And then when they hit 28, 29, 30 years old, then we're not going to pay them. We'll let a big market team pay them now. And that's what's the matter of baseball. We talked about this last year on the podcast where it seemed like half the league wasn't even going to try and win games, and I don't think it's that much better this year. Especially realistically, Major League Baseball, what is there? Maybe 8 teams that could probably win a title this year, maybe. The NBA is probably less than that. We've talked about that in the past too. There's probably 4 teams that could legitimately win an NBA title right now. So. In a lot of ways, Greg, pro sports are broken, badly broken, thanks to how the contracts are set up with their CBA, and just how draft lotteries, as you said, they are a cure that's worse than the actual disease. And now we got this big mess where, as you said, you nailed it when people said they care more about a few percentage points in the draft than their team actually winning a game or being competitive. And that's awful as a fan. I hate rooting for a team to lose, but that's how the rules are set up. You need to root for your team to lose so they can get that game-changing, franchise-changing player, even though there's no guarantee that Cade Cunningham's going to be that, or Evan Mobley, or Suggs, or any of these guys are going to be that. But that's the easiest way for a team that is not Miami or Los Angeles or Chicago or New York to get that franchise-altering player, because LeBron James is not going to sign a big money deal with the Detroit Pistons.
Right.
He's going to sign a big money deal with either his hometown team or obviously what he ended up doing, going to L.A. to play for the Lakers. So the Pistons are not in that market, so their hope of finding a franchise player, you either got to trade for him or you got to draft them yourself. And we saw how well trading for one worked out because they got one at the end of his career, and Blake Griffin, and that got him essentially 1 year of an 8 seed, and now they're going in the other direction where, well, we got to find a franchise player, we got to tank, and it's I can't believe that when I was a kid getting sucked into sports when I was 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, I don't know how I would feel about the game if the teams I was born into being a fan of were spending the first few years of my fandom tanking. Not like the teams we grew up with were any great shakes. The 70s were pretty sucky when it came to sports around here. But they were bad because they were just poorly run, and they were trying to win games. When we were kids, the Pistons had the Hall of Famers like Bob Lanier and Dave Bing, and the Wings had some great players like Mickey Redmond, and the Tigers were when we were kids. They were still the remnants of the '68 team, so we got to see some Hall of Fame talent there. But kids today, it's like. I hate sounding like old man yells at cloud right now, but if I'm a kid today, I can see why they're getting more wrapped up in watching people play video games when you have fan bases rooting, as you said, they're rooting for percentage points in a draft lottery. It's awful.
Yeah, I don't understand what the attraction is. I don't know how we got here. The NBA started it, obviously.
Yeah, and it's a Pandora's box they won't be able to close.
Yeah, and I don't know why we needed to have it to begin with.
Yeah.
And then what's worse, Al, they took a bad solution and they started monkeying with it and made it worse.
Yep, worse, exactly.
I almost would rather go back to the early days if you're going to have a draft lottery.
Right.
Go back to when it used to be back in the mid '80s if that's what you're going to do. But they
throw a ball, grab a ping pong ball, and whatever you get is what you get, and everybody gets the same odds. Yeah,
they took a bad solution and monkeyed with it and made it worse. I didn't think that was possible.
At the very least, or shrink the draft lottery. Why do we need 14 teams in the draft lottery? Why can't it be 4? 4, yeah. 4 or 5. There doesn't need to be half the goddamn league in a draft lottery. It's ridiculous. As you said, they're by monkeying with the draft lottery, they've really thrown a spanner, a monkey wrench per se, into the workings, and it's become a mess. All right, before we wrap up the show, talking about the Lions, let's throw out question 3 of the birthday game so I can be embarrassed about how badly I screwed it up.
Okay, he was a goalie, I will tell you that.
Uh-huh.
Played mostly for the Flyers. From the mid-'80s to the early to mid-'90s. He was the first NHL goalie to score a goal.
Oh, okay, so it's Ron Hextall.
Whose uncle was Dennis Hextall, whose father was Brian Hextall, and Big Hextall. And those Hextalls had, I think, Brian Hextall, there was an original Brian Hextall, Brian Hextall Sr., who was the father of both of those Hextalls. And so the Hextall family has got a long history of NHL players. I don't know that Ron Hextall's kids ever played in the NHL. I don't think so.
Yeah.
But, Ron Hextall. And I think he became GM of the Islanders, too, for a while there, Ron Hextall.
In other news, the Tigers are now losing 7-2 in the third. And meanwhile, might as well check the Pistons, the other tanking team. How are the Pistons doing here? The Pistons are losing, but they're only down 4 at the half. It's a competitive game. It's funny how we're saying the Pistons are tanking correctly because they play competitive games and yet they come up just that little bit short. And meanwhile, we got the Tigers who aren't tanking correctly because they're getting their windows blown out every night. So go figure. Right. All right. We got to talk a little bit about the NFL draft before we call it a night. And obviously, it's a big deal. It was, after a quiet 2020 draft, where the highlight of it was, Bill Belichick's dog sitting in front of a computer, and Roger Goodell sitting in his big comfy chair announcing the picks as Alexa is talking to me right now. Alexa, stop. I Computer, stop. That's right. I have to name my I have a couple of different ones, and I have to give them different names, and I ask them different things. So, oh, God damn it. Anyway, but things got kind of back to closer to normal with this year's draft, Greg. It was loud and crash and annoying, and it went 3 days and of big crowds and Roger Goodell looking terrified as they allowed super fans up on the stage. The Lions super fan, I think they call the guy Crackman, I believe is his name. He's out. Those people, I would be scared too, Greg, because those kind of super fans, they kind of scare me. That they are so heavily emotionally invested in a team that just sees them as a dollar sign, essentially. That just says that for all the loyalty you give them, what do you get in return other than usually suffering and pain? But regardless of that, don't get me going on superfans. Maybe that'll be my jerk of the week or superfans. But the Lions, actually, Greg, in the draft came out looking pretty good, at least according to the draft nicks and the talking heads and the pundits and the NFL experts. It's always too early to really grade a draft class. You got to wait 2-3 years at least. But regardless of that, the consensus was that the Lions draft, their grade was a high B, a B plus to A minus A. It was essentially they gave like a 3.9 to a 4-point on the grading scale. Most loved the pick of Oregon offensive tackle Penei Sewell at 7th overall, who, according to some of these guys out there, he may end up being the absolute most talented player overall in this draft. Essentially, he is literally got, Greg, can't miss stamped all over him, so he better not miss. Mm-hmm. This is a guy who they're saying, perennial All-Pro, perennial All-NFL, Hall of Fame caliber type player. At least that's the talent. And he's like, 19, 20 years old. He's a kid. He didn't even play all 4 years of college. For the downside of most of what I was reading about the grades and what they didn't like about the draft is that they only took one wide receiver and they waited till the 4th round to take one, which I just want to call them Sun Ra because aren't Amon-Ra St. Brown of the USC, but they didn't take him to the 4th round. He's a slot guy. He's not an outside guy. But and people look at the hell, we can look at the Lions wide receiver roster and wonder who the hell is Goff going to throw to, because it's a bunch of cast-offs right now. So that was the downside of the draft. Opinion was mixed on the strategy, because I know I have to admit I wondered too, because I'm on record on this podcast saying how stupid it was of Bob Quinn taking guards in back-to-back rounds when he did this last year, when he took a guard in the 3rd round and the 4th round. Well, the 3rd round guy became a starter, and the 4th round guy never got on the damn field. Well, this on this draft, Brad Hughes took a defensive tackle in the 2nd round, and then went again and took a defensive tackle in the 3rd round. The difference being that I can't even pronounce it, Onwuzurike, who was the first Levi. But I give it. That's the other thing. I think the Lions won they won on names alone. He had some really out there names, but he is a pass rushing tackle. Meanwhile, the other guy they took, Alim McNeil, is more of a run stopping tackle. Regardless, they decided to try and fix the defensive line, which was god awful last year. So at least credit to them for that. I guess it was only one possible reach, and that was trading up to take a linebacker out of Purdue, Derek Barnes, who had a normal name compared to most of the rest of the draft. But other than that, apparently, Greg, the strategy was to just take the best player available, regardless, for the most part, of position, starting with Sewell, because they bypassed on a quarterback. There was a lot of talk. What would they do if a quarterback dropped down to them? Justin Fields did drop down to them. He actually went, the next pick after that was to the Bears. And the Lions, from all accounts, if you were, of the film they showed of the War Room, they didn't even debate taking a quarterback. They saw Sewell was there. He was their man. They literally did not wait the entire time limit to make their pick. They saw he was there. They picked him. They literally were thrilled to death. They were unlike like that clip they showed of the Eagles, who didn't get their guy, and they all looked down and dejected because actually the Lions took the guy they wanted. So But essentially, it looks like this draft was best player available, heavy on athleticism, filling holes on the offensive and defensive lines and building out from there. And according to everybody, any expert, there was a lot of value because there were no Tavais, there were no Tees Tabors in this draft, at least according to people who are supposed to know these things. Who knows how it'll ultimately pan out, but it was refreshing to see the Lions be praised for a draft where they were pretty much limited to what they could do because they entered the draft, I think, with only 5 picks.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. Hey, this is. I always cringe, and I wrote this in my article, my column yesterday. I always cringe when I hear must or can't miss when I read that can't miss tag, because plenty of can't miss guys have done exactly that.
Oh yeah.
But by all accounts, here we go again. But by all accounts, this kid Sewell, he's only 20. He's going to be 21 until October.
Right.
Is a hell of a football player, an incredibly a beast, just a beast.
Yeah.
And the Lions now have the makings of a pretty good offensive line.
Really good offensive line.
Ragnow and Decker and now Sewell and maybe.
And the weak spot looks to be the guy they gave all the money to last year in Vatak.
They got to figure out, the guard situation. They got to kind of figure it out a little bit. They got some guys like Jonah Jackson, and they got some guys that could definitely be starting. That would start.
Yeah.
If they had a name of starting.
Right.
If they had to name 2 starting guards, they could do it. Or if they did do it right now. But hey, the Lions have nothing. This new regime has nothing but time. They have, and this is what I wrote in the column, is that they have time now, having both joined at the same time, Holmes and Campbell. They both have on the same timeline now, and they both have time to create this image or this character of this team that they want to put on the field. They can do it. They have the luxury of not, like you mentioned a little while ago, about Quinn being under the gun and maybe making some foolish maneuvers and so forth. But what I'm seeing, Al, with this regime is beyond just talking about the draft, is they seem to have a cohesiveness in the front office about what kind of team they want.
Right.
My complaint about Bob Quinn was, after a couple of years into his tenure, was that it seemed like he was just moving things around. There wasn't any sort of real, to me, direction that the franchise had. It had no character. You didn't know what kind of team they were. You didn't know what he was trying to do. Mm-hmm. Every year he'd bring in a different free agent. He'd let guys go, sign other guys to replace them. The drafts were spotty. And you just didn't know what he was really trying to accomplish. Right. And I know that that's probably not true. He probably did have some sort of a plan. It just wasn't evident in the way that he was compiling the roster. And indeed now, in retrospect, aside from the culture issue with players seeming to have been stifled and not having a lot of fun under Matt Patricia and Bob Quinn. Right. Look back at, you mentioned the Tees Tabors of the world, and that's, I know he's always going to have to own the Tees Tabor pick. Every GM has a pick they have to own. Oh, yeah. That's his. I get it. But there's it's just not just Tees Tabor. There's a lot of other really weird things he did with that roster. You mentioned the tie. That it just kind of seems like this regime from day one has said, this is what we're looking for. And they didn't stray from that, and they haven't strayed from that. They went for 2 straight defensive tackles in the second round, which raised some eyebrows. Okay, fine. But, hey, again, they've got time. They've signed some guys in free agency that they like. Unfortunately, one of them retired, Josh Hill, today, the tight end. But they signed some guys that they like. They drafted these kids that they really, really super high on. And they just seem to have an idea that this is what we want to create. Now, obviously, we need to see it on the field with wins and losses. Totally fair. but at least you feel like there's direction and that there's some sort of a plan. And Al, you and I have been following the Lions for 50 years, and so often that has been the knock.
Yeah.
Is that there really wasn't any sort of plan, or people weren't given long enough to execute a plan.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the way it is in pro sports. You don't have a lot of time. Fair or not, you oftentimes don't have a lot of time. You're almost under the gun as soon as you're hired.
Right.
I know that there's a honeymoon period here with with Holmes and Campbell. Yes, that's true. But hey, you go 4-12 next year, and all of a sudden the heat's on again. So that's the way it is. Mm-hmm. But at least I think the fans, I can tell you, the fans are on board with this regime. They love both. How many times do you see a fan base love a GM?
Yeah.
I mean, they love Holmes. They love Campbell to death, and they haven't even done any OTAs yet. Yep. So they're starting off on the right foot with the fan base for whatever that's worth. But as far as the actual football thing goes, they seem to just have something in mind. And I think that's half the battle. Because if you look at all the really successful teams, Al, in pro football, we're talking about football, so we'll stick to the NFL. You look at all the really good teams, they all seem to have one thing in common, which is a really good front office and a plan and a system that just seems to work. Yeah. Guys can leave and come and go, but they have this je ne sais quoi about them, and that's what the Lions have lacked, is that kind of intangible, because it really does start at the front office and work its way down. I think you're seeing that now, Al. Mm-hmm. And you're starting to see now that they're gone, the Quinn and Patricia era, you're starting to see little tidbits of, like T.J. Hawkinson, for example, was pulled aside, he says, and was told, don't have too much fun. Don't have too much fun. Yeah. Well, now Dan Campbell's letting him be an extra he did a cameo in a commercial. Mm-hmm. Hawkinson did. There seems to be some sort of a different kind of, almost like they've let the air out, opened the window, let the fresh air in. Yeah. With this new regime, and we'll see if it translates to wins and losses.
Yeah, I think that comes from obviously Campbell being a former NFL player, and he's coaching, I think, how he wanted to be coached or how he liked to be coached. Yeah, and there is something to said in today's sports where I think you are better served with a head coach who leans into the being a player's coach side of things rather than being a disciplinarian, just because it's a different era. I mean, you can't get away coaching a team like Vince Lombardi did anymore. It's just completely different. It wouldn't fly today. So, which makes it understandable why I think the Lions coaching staff is dominated with guys who played in the league. It gives them that gravitas, and also they've been exposed to how they've been coached to and what worked for them, how they think what's going to work for these guys. I guess the other thing I'll add is I have no problem with them passing on quarterback. I mean, I saw a lot of fields. We're in Big Ten country, so we see a lot of Big Ten football. And Fields was good, but he never blew my socks off. But I know it's silly to say, just because Ohio State has never really produced quarterbacks, that Fields is going to fit into that. He's going to be the next failed Ohio State quarterback at the next level. But, it's so, Fields just never really, I was never really sold as him being a top guy. And I was kind of shocked when it started coming out. Oh, yeah, this is the guy that's going to go in the, top of the first round as a quarterback. So, when you think about it, if Fields pans out, you hope he has seasons as good as Jared Goff's was when he was taking the Rams into the playoffs, into the Super Bowl. They have Jared Goff on a reasonable contract he's on a 4 years contract, and you can get out of it after two for sure if he's not performing. I have no problem. Let's roll with Jared Goff for a year or two, see what the hell happens. He's a legit NFL quarterback. And when it comes to quarterbacks, I'd rather have one in the hand than having two in the bush, as they say, when you have a bunch of unproven guys, and then you actually have a guy who has proven, he's got his downsides, but he has proven he is a capable NFL quarterback. I have no problem with them deciding, let's roll with golf for a year or two and go from there and pass up on someone like Fields or whomever else was available at that, for them. And so we'll see what happens. But yeah, I thought it made sense. I'm not sold on Fields. It looks like the Lions brass weren't sold on him either. The way they leaped to draft the offensive tackle, and I think that's my other question I have about this draft. You just spent pretty much a crap ton of money to keep Taylor Decker. But do you keep Decker as your left tackle if Sewell's going to be better? Because isn't it don't they say your best offensive lineman should be your left tackle, not your right tackle? It's reversed if your quarterback is left-handed. There's very few left-handed quarterbacks. Obviously, Goff isn't left-handed. Right. So you want your left tackle to protect the blind side of your right-handed quarterback. Does it make sense to play Sewell as a right tackle, or should you flip-flop him? That I don't know. We'll see what happens. But traditionally, your best lineman is your left tackle. Right. But I have no idea what the Lions are thinking, how they're going to end up setting up their offensive line. As you mentioned, they still got to figure out guard as well. But at the very least, the pieces are there for them to be a very, very, very good offensive line. And that's one other narrative we have to kill, is that the fan base loves to say, "Oh, the Lions never spend on the offensive line. They never draft offensive linemen." They've drafted a crap ton of offensive linemen and are often high in the draft. They got Decker was a first-round pick. Frank Ragnow was a first-round pick. Johnson, the guard, he was a third-round pick. Glasgow, before they allowed him to leave, which was dumb. He was a third-round pick. Now you got Sewell, who was a first-round pick. And obviously they have Vitae, who they gave $10, $15 million a year to in a long-term contract. So Lions fans sometimes love to regurgitate facts that are no longer true that may have once been. And one of them is they don't spend on the offensive line. The other is the Fords are cheap. No, the Fords are no longer cheap. They spend money. They just don't spend it smartly. So hopefully some of these tropes begin to die out with this new regime.
We're also seeing, Al, something that is kind of new in the NFL, which is teams are moving away from their franchise quarterbacks. They're cutting bait early. Yeah. Sam Darnold, just 3 years ago, was going to be the savior for the Jets, and he came out of the gate, had that great game against the Lions on opening night. And now look what happened to Darnold. Now the Jets are on to their next franchise quarterback, Zach Wilson. The Bears 4 years ago, Mitch Trubisky was their guy. Yeah, just 4 years ago, and now Trubisky's yesterday's news, and now they got Justin Fields. Yeah. So it's. Oh God, what about the Cardinals taking quarterback in the first round 2 years in a row? Right. That's right. That's right. So yeah. So. I'm with you as well. I don't know that the Lions I don't know that they needed a quarterback that high. I mean, I know that you want to draft. This kind of before they traded Stafford, as early as I think 18 or 19, I was suggesting you got to draft a quarterback because Stafford can't play forever. He was getting hurt every year. Mm-hmm. You got to have a guy that's going to step in, not Chase Daniel either. A young guy that's going to step in and is going to be your next guy. Now I don't feel that way because the Lions have Goff, who's younger, who's not, so far at least, hasn't shown a proclivity to being injured, although he has been injured. Right. But he hasn't been a porcelain doll either. So he's okay. I know that a lot of people are down on him. They don't think he's all that. Okay, fine. But the Lions have so many problems right now, Al, that I just think that Goff, it can be the guy, can be serviceable until you find the next guy. Yeah. I mean, you can't solve all your problems in one draft anyway. Right. That 74 draft by the Steelers was a unicorn. That doesn't happen all the time. I mean, my goodness gracious. So I think that I'm totally fine with the Sewell pick. From what I'm told, this kid is just otherworldly when it comes to when it comes to being an offensive lineman. I mean, we're talking, they're already, Anthony Munoz and all these other names are already popping up. Yeah. Well, we don't know, of course, but Well, with this regime, I just have a feeling it's going to work itself out, and I didn't feel that way with the other regimes.
Yep. Best player available. If that's what you're going to do, I am more than happy with taking the best player available, and it looks like that's at least their philosophy. We'll see what happens if their strategy pans out. If these guys were the best player available. But at the very least, it looks like we have a front office that has a strategy, that has an ethos, as they would say, and they're going to stick to it. So we'll see what happens. But at the very least, it's very refreshing to see this franchise be much more open with how they're handling things. They're talking to the press more. They're actually giving their thoughts on how they're doing things compared to how locked down and secretive and just obnoxiously anal Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia were compared to what we're seeing from these guys. Yeah, and it kind of works out. You went from the intense disciplinarian Belichickian type guys, and now we've done the 180 and gone to the players coach and the fired up young GM who's got a plan, and he's going to stick to it, and he's telling everybody that that's what he's doing. So at the very least, it's a refreshing change of pace after the last few years. I just hope it doesn't blow up in our faces again. But I'm long past the point, Greg, where I'm drinking the Kool-Aid of any of these teams. I'm in wait-and-see mode. You have to show me before I can really buy into this stuff. I mean, I've been a fan long enough to realize that we've been here, done that, and wrote the book, essentially, when it comes to a lot of this stuff. So I am not, because it's funny when you go online and you see young kids who haven't been a fan of they're still in their 20s, and they're saying, oh, we're going to be good next year. They really are. I was like that once, too, back in 1975. All right, with that, I think it's time to start wrapping things up. So, Greg, who is your jerk of the week?
Well, I don't know if you remember, Al, an NHL player, because he was a goon, so he had to make a lot of noise. He wasn't in the news a lot when he played. Right. And that's George Peros, P-A-R-O-S. Yeah. George Peros is now the NHL department, the head of player safety for the NHL.
Yes, he's been turned up in my notifications quite a bit.
And he has whiffed on a situation with Tom Wilson.
Oh, yes.
Who's got a bad reputation of doing a lot of dirty things. Well, he pulled some nonsense again against the Rangers. He punched a guy from behind. He threw another guy down on the ice. And Peros is essentially, so far, has given Wilson a tap on the wrist.
Right.
And the Rangers, it got so bad, and I've never seen this before, by the way. Usually, when these kind of statements come out, they're to complain about the severity of a punishment. The Rangers released a statement. The New York Rangers are extremely disappointed that Capitals forward Tom Wilson was not suspended for his horrifying act of violence last night at Madison Square Garden. Wilson is a repeat offender with a long history of these types of acts, and we find it shocking that the NHL and the Department of Player Safety failed to take the appropriate action and suspend him indefinitely. Wilson's dangerous and reckless actions caused an injury to Artemi Panarin that will prevent him from playing again this season. We view this as a dereliction of duty by NHL head of player safety George Peros and believe he is unfit to continue in his current role. I've never seen anyone, a team, release a statement calling for the head of a disciplinarian for being too lenient. Yeah. It's always the other way around. And so my jerk of the week is Peros because I don't know what he's thinking. Wilson is indeed a repeat offender. There's no question about it. And I don't know where he's coming from. Yeah. And for a team, the Rangers, I'm not a Rangers apologist. I'm not a fan of the Rangers necessarily. But for them to release a statement like this just shows the depth of which this has gone to. And I just think that if we talk about player safety all the time in all the sports in terms of players are bigger, stronger, faster, etc. Right. If these kinds of things have to be dealt with sternly. I mean, these fines and these taps on the wrist are not going to get it done, and messages have to be sent. And if a guy like Wilson, who's done this over and over and over again, isn't going to get held accountable, then you can't expect. Now you create a situation now where now you don't know where this Peros guy is coming from. What is he going to do next time? Mm-hmm. Is he going to overreach on the next guy and over-punish him to try to make up for what he didn't do to Wilson? So I think that my jerk of the week is Peros, because guys like that who are in a position of that importance and who play the game, obviously, ought to know better. There's got to be some sort of – I remember John Tortorella saying, where's the respect among players anymore? Just complete lack of respect among our fellow players to one another. Where's the respect that Tom Wilson has of his fellow NHL players? And where is a guy like Peros, who should be supporting that kind of respect? What kind of message is he sending by slapping Wilson on the wrist? So my jerk of the week is George Peros.
Yeah, it's Wilson committed assault.
Yeah.
Essentially, yeah. That scene, between the guy pulling a guy down. If that guy lands a different way, it's a skull fracture. And then punching the guy when his head's on the ice. I mean, that's stuff that the NHL needs to legislate that stuff out of the game. We're past the point where teams should have goons on the ice.
That's the kind of stuff, Al. They would get guys kicked out of leagues, out of the like on the American Hockey League and the Western Hockey League, the minor leagues. If you did something like that, you kicked out of the league.
Yeah, you nail it. That's a lack of respect for your fellow players, pure and simple. And a guy like that shouldn't even be in the league. And the NHL has a long history of being all over the place when it comes to disciplining on ice incidents.
Yeah,
and usually the air, I'm not coming down hard enough. I'm with you here. God, I don't know. For my jerk week, I could go all over the damn place. Carlos Monarez made some more dumb comments in the paper again this week when it came to the draft. He gave the Sewell pick a D, I think, because they could have taken a quarterback. I think it was. I think that was what his thing was. Or they needed a skill player rather than building from. He did, for some reason, he was just incensed that they were building the offensive line. He just pissed them off for whatever reason.
Right.
We got Aaron Rodgers. And the Packers. You could go either way with this one, who looks like they're on the verge of a divorce. Right. But it's like Rodgers didn't really became vocal just a day or two before the draft, where it could really throw a monkey wrench into your team's plans. But the Packers are not exempt from being a jerks too, because they have kind of jerked around Aaron Rodgers and taken him for granted, and they have really not given him Aaron Rodgers is the epitome of a quarterback who has made the guys around him better, and he really has not gotten the support from his front office.
Right.
Because, look at the wide receivers he's had to throw to over the years. He's had a bunch of nobodies, for example.
Yeah.
So I can understand that. But I think I'm going to go with Roberto Alomar as my jerk of the week.
Yes.
Yeah. Who was Major League Baseball was contacted by a woman, and there's no criminal charges. She didn't even file a lawsuit, but she went to Major League Baseball, the team she's involved with, and reported them an incident she had with him. And they're not saying what it was, but it must have been horrific. Because it did not take long for baseball to sever all ties with him. The teams he were involved with severed all ties with him. He was on the Hall of Fame, Baseball Hall of Fame committee. He resigned today. And the only statement we've gotten from Alomar is, I wish I would have had the opportunity, and this is not from Alomar, it's from a spokesperson, essentially saying, I would wish we would have had the proper forum to rebut these allegations. Essentially, what's essentially what he's saying there is that we didn't get a chance to gaslight the media about this.
Right.
We couldn't get in front of this and make shit up or try to blame the victim.
Yeah.
Instead, the victim came forward, went right to the people needed to hear about it, and I don't know what it was, Greg, but it had to have been egregious because there was no dilly-dallying with this.
Right.
She went to baseball. Less than a week later, Alomar is out of baseball. Right. So I don't know what Roberto Alomar did, but it must have been heinous. So my jerk of the week is Roberto Alomar. 1, for doing something absolutely heinous to a woman, and 2, for having a spokesperson try to gaslight people by saying, well, we didn't have a chance to get our side of the situation out there. Now they need to do with that coach from California, with Mickey Galloway, I think his name is. They're still, quote unquote, investigating that mess. Who, he's still suspended. He's with their pitching coach, I believe, who has a long record of sexual harassment with other teams, and yet he's still being investigated. So now baseball needs to do. So that's my jerk of the week as well. Do something about that guy. And also, at least they did something with Roberto Alomar.
Well, and of course,
I have a feeling I don't want to know what he did because it sounds awful.
And of course, Alomar spit at an umpire.
Yes, yeah. Not like he has a great track record. He's not a good person.
But what baseball did do, well, it wasn't baseball, it was the Mets. Right. They fired their GM for sexually harassing a female reporter, if you remember that one. Right. Over the winter, the guy, I can't remember his name. He was only the GM for a little while, and he was sending unwanted texts to this female reporter, including pictures of his anatomy and the whole 9 yards. Yeah. And the Mets, who have had a lot of weird hires in their tenure, got rid of this guy. I can't remember his name. It just happened over the winter. Yeah. He was bounced. So there's some hope when you see accountability. There is some hope for something. But I agree with you about Alomar for sure. Yeah, and you're right about Callaway. That's I don't know what's going on with that. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's taken far too long for baseball to, there's Jared Porter is the GM you're talking about. I just looked it up. Baseball has taken far too long. And for that matter, what kind of adult are you that thinks it's appropriate to text pictures of your junk? Right. Who do you think you are, Brett Favre? Jesus Christ! I don't know, Greg.
And she was, if I really don't. Correctly, she was she was not an American. She was. I want to say she was from a Central American country or Mexico or something, and she did, or maybe even South America.
Yeah, she was not a native. She was not a native U.S. citizen.
She didn't quite know how to respond.
Exactly,
really
because she was worried about what could happen to her because she was not a citizen.
And the apologist for this idiot.
She ended up leaving journalism because of it.
Right. And the apologists for this idiot were saying, well, she never said no. And I mean, really?
Yeah. There's been someone, because I almost went with, Brett Favre, who earlier this year said he was against players kneeling. And then he came out, I think, in the last couple weeks saying, politics needs to stay out of sports. You've been getting political. There is, I don't know, Greg, there seems to be so many man-children in pro sports anymore. It's mind-boggling. Or for that matter, now you have Terry Bradshaw getting all over Aaron Rodgers' case. Rodgers does have some legitimate reasons to be upset with the Packers. Yet Terry Bradshaw, I read that he didn't go to Chuck Noll's funeral because he thought he got treated wrongly by his coach. Yeah. Yet now he's coming out and saying, "Oh, you signed a contract, live with it." He held a grudge as well. It's just so insane, Greg. Sports. It seems like every time on this podcast we just talk about depressing subjects because that's what sports really, in a lot of ways, has turned into. It's kind of a microcosm of society as a whole, because society as a whole right now is kind of screwed up. And for that matter, get yourselves goddamn vaccinated and wear a mask. It was so refreshing today, Greg. I did leave the house for a little bit today. I got a haircut. I didn't wear a mask the entire time because I'm vaccinated, for fuck's sake. Now, I did have to enter a place of business, and I did wear a mask when I did that. Like I still think you should. And I do have a compromised immune system, so I'm not completely out of the woods. But getting vaccinated was not that hard, and wasn't that big. Still not that big of a deal to wear a mask. I'll just put it this way: the same people who tend to say, "It's my body; I have the right to make a decision not to get vaccinated," are the same people who say, "You can't get an abortion."
Right.
It's the same doublespeak we're seeing in sports from a lot of these people. It's just. My body, my right, unless it's about abortion. It's different. I don't know, Greg. Sometimes this feels like my little 2 hours of sanity every week when we get the vendor's planes about that. All right, let's get the hell out of here because we've run long in this show. So I think we're going to be pushing 2 hours this week. So why don't you get out where you can find us on social media, any thank yous, and what they can look forward to.
Read me on my WordPress Out of Bounds blog. Pretty much a new column is there every Monday. You can also follow me on Twitter at Greg Eno and follow the Knee Jerks on Twitter at the Knee Jerks. Be also mindful that next time we are with you, we hope to have a recorded interview with new Eastern Michigan basketball coach Stan Heath that we were going to, I think, record next week and play for you on the 18th, so stay tuned for that. And I want to thank my lovely wife Sharon for putting up with this stuff every 2 weeks, and thank you, Big Al, for making Tuesday night so gosh darn fun.
Indeed. To listen to the show, find us at all the usual places. We're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Stitcher Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Play, Amazon Music, Deezer, Radio Public. We're on YouTube as well. We're also thekneejerks.net is the homepage where the links will be aggregated, where you can, if you're on your big boy computer or if you're on your laptop, you can right-click and download the MP3 to do with what you will. I want to give a shout-out to Linda, who was on her last shift of the week and has been working her ass off trying to save the lives of you idiots who aren't wearing masks. And trust me, as she's a medical worker and she is beyond burned out right now. She is fed up. Much like you talk to a nurse, you talk to a doctor, you talk to health professionals, they are beyond fed up and burned out. So you don't believe what's going on? Talk to a medical professional. They'll set your ass straight. So, with that, we hope we set your ass straight after 2 hours of talking Detroit sports. Like I said, hopefully on the next show we'll be able to talk a little college basketball with Stan Heath, and obviously we'll do a post-mortem, Greg, of the Red Wings season, because they only have 2 games left, and they'll be done after this weekend. So we'll talk a little bit of Red Wings, and the Pistons become up at the end of the year, and we'll probably vent about the Tigers some more as they are still losing tonight. Until that time, 2 weeks from now, this is Al Beaton saying good evening, good luck, and aloha.
Shower to everybody. We'll see you in 2 weeks.